label calculations. And we, I don't know, I enjoy teaching calculations. It's that time of year. We're getting ready to get hot and heavy with the fertilizer spreaders, with the spray tanks, the whole 9 yards. I can't believe how fast January flew by, and it looks like February is going to fly by. And as much as I enjoyed being outside today, we had some beautiful weather. So I'm seeing some grass that needs to be cut. And anybody else seeing that so far?
Yeah.
It's at that time of year. So it's time, like I said, to get the hoppers hot and to get the spray tanks full. So we'll go ahead and get started with label calculations. And so our objectives, we are going to distinguish between a label and a labeling. Label is what's printed on the container, the pesticide container itself. Labeling is everything else that's included that we may get from the ag agents, that we can get from our pesticide vendors, anywhere. We go to a trade show and we get flyers and we get pamphlets and stuff. All of that is considered labeling for the pesticides. And actually the label is included in that labeling, but the label is exactly what is printed on the bottle. We are going to understand, sorry about that red ink there on the screen, but we are going to understand registration differences between federal EPA and special local needs and emergency exemptions. I haven't personally had to deal with any of those, but there may be some people here in the webinar that has. And then we're going to find brand, chemical, and common names on the label. And then we'll identify active ingredient percentage in the pesticide formulation. And then we'll understand the wording used on labels and its meaning, whether it's danger, poison, danger, warning, and caution. And then we'll look at an MSDS sheet and identify some of the parts of it. And we will understand calibration of equipment. We will calculate application area size, determine some application rates, determine the amount of pesticide carrier and concentrate to be used, and then we'll understand nozzle speed and pressure and how they affect calibration. And I'm going to see if I can remove that red ink that is going on here. It's not going to let me erase it. I'm trying. There we go. Cool deal. So it's going. We don't have to see it now. And last but not least, we will look at some pesticide math, and we'll kind of compare it to actually purchasing some beverages and calculating that through a pesticide problem that we've got set up at the very end. And so label or labeling, again, I kind of went over that and during the objectives, but the label itself is the information attached or printed on a pesticide container. The bad things about those labels on the bottles is that they're going to get wet. They're going to get destroyed. They're going to get messy. They're going to get sweaty. It's just not a good place to put it, but they have to have it on the container. So I always ask when we purchase our pesticides, can we get an extra copy? If not, we'll always go to Google and we will search that pesticide, and you're always going to be able to find a label. If they're short and sweet, we'll go ahead and print them out and keep them in a loose leaf notebook in the truck. If not, I like taking a tablet with us, and that way we can have an electronic copy, because I never want to depend on the label that stays attached to the bottle, because it's going to get messed up. Your labeling, which does include the label, and then all other information that we can get, whether it's at a trade show, our dealer that we're buying it from, ag agents will have a lot of stuff, and then just the sales reps that we'll see, here and there, that'll give us the information. And this labeling can include leaflets or brochures that we do pick up at some of the trade shows and stuff that we go to. With EPA approval, it takes a minimum of 6 years to receive EPA approved labeling. And that's quite a bit of time. So if you're a scientist and you're working on some new formulation that can take care of some of our problems out there, it's going to take a while to get it done. But the EPA, they are going to have to determine the level of toxicity. They are going to test the residual that is left in the environment. A lot of pesticides become restricted use pesticides just because of their residual activity. And then they'll look at the environmental hazards, and then they'll add the precautionary statements to each pesticide. So it is a lengthy process for these companies to come up with their pesticides. Here we're looking at a fictitious label. This is Rondo herbicide, which, you know, is pretty much going to be an example of Roundup. And it's got the name there circled in red. It's got its EPA registration number highlighted there in the yellow. And then in the blue, it's got the active ingredient. And it does have the glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. And we're looking at about 41% there. And then all the other ingredients are 59% to make up the total of 100%. The precautionary statements are there: hazardous to humans and domestic animals, and it always needs to be kept out of the reach of children. So preferably in a locked up storage bin, a little outdoor shed or whatever. I like keeping our pesticides separate. That's why I love the little sheds that you can buy at the big box store, and, you know, you can put them somewhere near your facility, and it just contains the pesticides. And the only people that need access to that is you, being the owner, and your technicians that are applying the pesticides. But there's more information there on this label. It says avoid Rondo contact with foliage, green stems, exposed non-woody roots, or the fruit of crops, except your Rondo Rip crops, which is like your Roundup Ready crops. Also on desirable plants and trees, and because severe injury or destruction will occur. So that is one fictitious label that we'll be studying. With your class and registration, it is based on restricted use or general use. Basically, the way I like describing this, restricted use means you're going to have a pesticide license to purchase it and to apply the pesticide. Homeowners cannot go and buy restricted use pesticides, even to put it on their own yards. They have to be licensed. General use pesticides, these are pesticides that you can pick up at the big box store. Anybody can put them out. Most of the time, it's going to be applicators like ourselves, but homeowners could actually go and put it up. And because a lot of the big box stores are selling some of the stuff that we purchase through our dealers and through the landscape supply houses. They may not be in such a high concentrate, but still they're considered general use there when they're put on those shelves. But this restriction, whether it's a RUP, a restricted use pesticide, or a GUP, general use pesticide, depends on application. If we're loading or mixing it, loading and mixing is when we are exposed to this pesticide more so than applying the pesticide, because we're dealing with the concentrate, pouring it into the tank. And as we can see, this young man here, he's suited up. You know, he's got the yellow the suit on, he's got the respirator, he's got the goggles, the green gloves, he's protecting himself. Now, when he actually applies that pesticide, he may be able to take some of that PPE off, because it's only required being that fully protected at the load mix site. It's also dependent on the transportation, the storage, and the handling after breaking the seal, on how dangerous it is and whether it's, you know, deemed restricted or general use. How the equipment is cared for and maintained, and then how we dispose of the containers. And usually that's a triple rinse, and then we can discard of them properly. With minimum risk pesticides, they are exempt from EPA registration. There is no label requirements. However, we here in North Carolina do require that they are registered with the state of North Carolina. You know, I'm trying to think of one right off the top of my head of a minimum risk, but I'm sure it's one that we can buy at, you know, either Lowe's or Home Depot or one of the other stores. Standard registrations, you as a certified pesticide applicator are responsible for only applying pesticides registered with the EPA. Now, can anybody give me an example of a pesticide that's not registered with the EPA? Because pretty much everything that we purchase is registered. So when might we run into a situation where we have a pesticide that is not registered? And I asked one of our local ag agents that, and he gave me a really good answer. So I want to see if you guys kind of know where we're at with that. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Surfactants ain't and pesticide.
Yeah, but we're talking about one that's not registered. A pesticide. Anybody ever grow up on a farm?
Yep.
What do we find in some of Grandpa's old cabinets and stuff?
Moonshine.
Well, that yeah, yes, definitely that. But if he's a farmer, what else is he going to have besides some moonshine?
Old chemicals.
Old chemicals that may no longer be registered with the EPA. At the time he purchased them, they were registered, but they deemed them too dangerous and they never did go back and renew their registration. And so, yes, and we found a bunch of that stuff. When my grandmother passed, we never really messed with anything. I never knew my grandfather. I mean, he died when I was a little boy. But when grandma passed away, we went through all the sheds and the barns and stuff on the farm, and we found pesticides in glass containers. So you know how old they are with that. And a lot of them were expired. They were no longer registered with the EPA. FIFRA, this is a special local needs registration. This allows the states to expand the use of certain pesticides for use or targets not specifically listed on the label. So if there is some type of infestation of an insect that's going to destroy, a farmer's crop, they may go and get a special permit to actually use a chemical that they think will actually take care of that insect for them. Even though it's not listed on the label. So it does allow for things like that. I've never had to use it. Has anybody else had to deal with a special local needs or anything? A lot of the ag agents never have had to deal with it. Because there's pretty much something out there that's going to kill every bug and insect that we come across or disease. Emergency exemptions. This is based on public health emergencies. This will allow the use of a pesticide for non-registered use. So if it's endangering the general public and they know that a pesticide will take care of it, they're going to allow us to actually use it. When reading the pesticide label, understand that it is the law. It is a contract basically between you and the company. You're the applicator. You're the one applying the pesticide. They've wrote the label, expecting every single one of us to read the label. Now, we do need to read the label, especially at the beginning of each season. We're going to forget. We're not using that same chemical every February and every March. We're not using that same one. So we need to brush up on our labels, and we need to have our employees read the labels if they are the ones actually spraying the lawns out there. It is the legal document with instructions on mixing, applying, storing, and disposing of the pesticides. Label is the law. On your pesticide label, you are going to see the trade or the brand name, which is, we're looking at Roundup here. This is the most common pesticide around, and it is recognized in every single household with all the negative publicity that it's gotten. And to be honest with you, I don't think they'll probably ever get rid of it. If they do, they'll come up with something similar. It'll still have glyphosate in it, and they'll just change the name because people only recognize the brand name. And unfortunately, a lot of us purchase our chemicals based on just knowing that brand name, whereas we could actually buy something a little bit cheaper. But the trade name is used in advertisements. It indicates the formulation and the active ingredient. Example would be nematodes 3E. This indicates 3 pounds of active ingredient, and the E means that it is a emulsifiable concentrate. Just having that in the name. Nematodes, if anybody's recently taken their pesticide exam, I took it more than 20 years ago, and then a couple years ago I took it again just to see if the test had changed, and it had not. It was still bubble diagram and everything. You had to have a number 2 pencil. And nematodes 3E was an example of the label that was on the test. And don't choose your pesticide, like I said, based on the trade or brand name, because they can be similar to other products. Your formulation and your pesticide type that's listed on the front of the label and contains a short statement. Example, a herbicide for control on woody brush and weeds, just like the Rondo example we saw. Here we have a suspension concentrate. It's termed SC, and it is right in there, and it is a group 4A insecticide. Here we have karate, and it is a restricted use, and that is your classification statement. And you think, that if it was a restricted use pesticide, that it might be danger warning instead of just warning. But it's restricted use because of the toxicity of the fish and aquatic animals that it can harm. And that's why they've deemed it a RUP. Your ingredient statement, your active ingredient is the chemical in the pesticide formulation that destroys the pest or performs the desired function. Your inert ingredient, not always named, but the label shows the percentage. Your chemical name identifies the structure of the pesticide and the chemical components. And then there may or may not be a common name, which is a shorter name because the chemical name can be very complex, but it must be approved by the EPA to officially appear on the label. You're also going to see the EPA registration number, and it must appear on all pesticide labels. And then there's going to be an establishment number, which will identify the facility where the product was produced. And you can see it right here. We've got your EPA registration number 66330-367. The establishment number is 51036-GA-001. And then we do have the company name and address is Arista Life Science North America. And here is our signal words. We have a danger poison, and it'll always be written in Spanish as well. Peligro, veneno, and then danger, and then warning, and then caution. And I'm sorry if you can hear the dogs in the background. But this danger poison will always have your skull and crossbones on it. And then another one right here, example of it, danger, the skull and crossbones, highly toxic, entering the body in either way that we can get it, whether we've breathed it in or if we've got it absorbed through our skin or if we've got it in our eyes or our mouth. Has anyone ever seen some of these videos or pictures of where they have a lawn care technician go underneath like a blue light and you can see the pesticides will actually glow? It's kind of like going into a bathroom and you can see, the where it needs to be cleaned. They'll shine this blue light over the individual's hands and it'll just glow even after washing their hands where they're not washing it thoroughly enough. It's kind of makes you think there about your safety, because what are we doing? How many times a day do we touch our face? Anybody know? It's kind of unbelievable what they say. I've heard numbers as high as 5,000 times a day. That seems ridiculous to me. But I guess if you're doing this or whatever, but I'm assuming, the hotter it is, the more so you are going to wipe, the sweat off the brows. And that is going to be an issue where you're going to touch your face that many times. So always be careful with that. Warning is moderately toxic if entering through the mouth, skin, or inhalation. It will cause moderate eye and skin irritation. Caution, slightly toxic if entering through the mouth, skin, or inhalation. You do have slight eye or skin irritation. And then you're going to have your statement of first aid treatment. In case of contact with the skin, do this. In case of contact with your eyes, do this. Or if you've breathed it in, you must do this. If anyone's breathed it in or inhaled it, you're going to have to be really, really careful when providing first aid. What is the first thing you think you're going to have to do if you think somebody's been exposed to a pesticide and they've inhaled it?
Move in the fresh air.
Well, you got to move in the fresh air, but what do you got to do first?
Protect yourself.
Yeah, protect yourself. You've got to take care of you. There's no medicine in a gunfight in the military. And so when there is a pesticide exposure, you got to make sure that the exposure's cut off or that you have on the proper PPE before you can go in there and get them. All right. Precautionary statements. These are precautions to be followed when using the chemical. This may indicate which entry route, whether it's mouth, skin, or inhalation, and it should be especially protected. Actions taken to avoid the acute, delayed, or allergic reactions. And it's saying here, these precautionary statements: extremely hazardous liquid and vapor, if inhaled, may be fatal if swallowed and it burns the skin. Do not get in eyes, on skin, or on clothing. Vicane specialty gas fumigant is odorless. Exposure to toxic levels may occur without warning or detection by the user. With first aid in all cases of overexposure, such as nausea, difficulty in breathing, abdominal pain, allowing slowing of movements and speech, numbness in extremities, get medical attention immediately and take person to a doctor or emergency treatment facility. If inhaled, get exposed person to fresh air and then keep warm and at rest. But listen to those first major symptoms that they're having: nauseous, difficulty in breathing, even abdominal pain. What does that almost sound like? Can even be confused with, myocardial infarction or a heart attack. A lot of these symptoms with pesticides, you'll start seeing it, especially with the nausea and the difficulty in breathing, two of your major symptoms of a heart attack. PPE, it's going to tell us that. What is our personal protective equipment that we're going to wear? I usually go overboard with it. I'm going to make sure that I am protected, especially after seeing those pictures of the pesticide glowing on the individual's hands. But it's going to give us recommendations on what PPE should be worn to protect us. The environmental hazards and general environmental statements, the warnings on the label to prevent the runoff and drift, and then the physical and chemical hazards and whether they are flammable or corrosive. And these are especially important for our local fire departments. Why? They need to have a list of everything that we have in our shops. And why is that?
So they'll know how to respond and treat you.
Do what, Charles? Well, there's supposed to be, we got to keep an inventory of all of our pesticides. We got to keep one for ourselves in the shop where it's safe. There needs to be one in the storage location of the pesticides. And then the fire department is supposed to have one. Why do we want our fire departments to have a copy of our pesticides? A list.
They're doing with.
Keep them
So they know
safe.
what you're using.
Yeah, it keeps them safe.
Yeah.
If in case our shop catches on fire, our shop has caught on fire before. And if they're having to go in there, they need to know which pesticides are flammable. If it's going to cause, toxic gas or whatever it happens. So we got to protect those men and women. Your directions for use. This section specifically details how to use, store, and dispose of your pesticides. And remember, the label is the law. And then always read the label first. Me and my good friend, Matt Martin, he has an awesome YouTube page when it comes to turf grass management. We're always talking about, we have to read it. And my best place for me to read pesticide labels is here on my phone. If I'm, at, shouldn't say dinner with the wife or whatever, but if I'm bored or whatever, I am going to, pull out my phone and I'm going to do some research, on these labels that I know we're going to be spraying. Storage and disposal. General instructions for storage and disposal of the chemical in the container may be under the headings labeled important, note, or even general instructions. And you'll have the address here. Here's US Ag LLC. It is in Luthersville, Georgia. And it's got their phone number and their website. It's the name and address of the manufacturer. And they will have the address on there as well. Your net contents, how much product is in the container, whether it's dry or wet. If it's dry, it's going to be in pound or ounces. If it's wet, it's going to be in gallons, quarts, or pints. And as you can see here on the Demon insecticide, we have 1 pint. Each container states the total amount of product expressed as pounds, ounces, gallons, pints, etc. And determine the total active ingredient per container. Use the rate of active ingredient in the container. Our dry formulations use a percentage of active ingredient. Liquids use the pounds active ingredient per gallon equivalent on the label. Our agricultural use requirements. This is only for pesticides covered by the EPA Worker Protection Standard, or the WPS. This is the protection of ag workers. And there was, problem with a lot of, farm help, going into the fields right after an application, and they were getting sick, and some of them even died. So they did come up with the Worker Protection Standard, and all your farm hands, they have to be trained within a couple days of actually working, having their brief introductory, and then they have to go through the whole training by so many days as well to make sure that these individuals are covered. And here is a restricted use pesticide label, vaporized WP, meaning it's a wettable powder. So number 1 is our restricted use designation. Number 2 is our trade name, which is vaporized. 3 is the formulation, WP. And actually within the name, it has the formulation. So vaporized WP. Our mode of action is group 10 insecticide. And then our active ingredients is vaporin. And then we see that chemical name right into there, 2-vaporizin in dihydrogen monoxide, which is the 12%. So it's very low percentage weight. And then the other active ingredients is 88%, but it's still a restricted use pesticide, even though by weight, it's not that much in it. The net contents, it's a 5-pound container. There's our EPA registration number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the EPA number 1, 2, 3. So it's just a fictitious label. We've got the manufacturer, Agricultural Chemical Company, out of Logan, Utah. The signal word is caution. And look at that. That's even it's the lowest signal word that we have, caution, and it's still a restricted use pesticide. We need to keep out of the reach of children. There's our first aid in 12. And then 13 is our precautionary statements. Wash the hands before eating, drinking, or chewing gum. Wash our PPE separately and from other laundry, and we should be doing that anyway. And then 14 is our directions for use, and then 15 is our storage and disposal. Our material safety data sheets, MSDS. This manufacturer's required to develop an MSDS for each product and provide it upon request. Our components, it has the chemical product identification, the fire and explosion hazards, our physical and chemical properties, our toxicological information and human health data, and then our personal protection recommendations, or our PPE, and then any additional information. And then it may even talk about placards if we are having to transport our chemicals. How much? Our directions for use. If the range stated, if a range is stated, always use the least possible amount to achieve the goal. So if it's 3 to 5 ounces, you would go with 3. The recommendations can be provided by consultants, industry organizations, cooperative extension, university specialists, and pesticide dealers. Now, when we're talking about applying this pesticide, well, first, let's kind of go back to the to a statement that I've always said. When we're applying a pesticide, what is the number one reason that we have a pesticide failure? When we make an application, or any of our colleagues, if we make an application, what's the number one reason we have pesticide failure?
Not identifying the pest?
Correct. Yes, Mr. Short. Awesome. Incorrectly identifying the pest is the number one reason we have a pesticide failure. Second is going to be we didn't apply the correct amount. Now, do you think it's more costly to apply too little of the pesticide or to apply too much of the pesticide?
Too much.
Why is that, Mr. Gibson?
Well, I mean,
you're right.
You can ruin more than you can fix. You can ruin more in 10 minutes than you can fix in a season.
Exactly. That's a good answer. Real good answer. But also, applying too little can cost you a lot of money too. So both the answers are right. Why is it very costly for us as an applicator to apply too little of the product?
But we get a little sometimes, and you don't put out enough, and you make multiple trips, and then sometimes that's when you put too much.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect answer. Yeah. Mr. and Miss Smith calls us out there. We go and do an application, and we didn't calculate enough, and we've applied too much. They call us back, and they're like, "Hey, we paid you for this pesticide application, and nothing's happened. We have to go back. We're doing it twice." And 9 times out of 10, we're a little upset with ourselves. So what do we do on that second application?
Throw it to it.
We throw it to it, don't we? And then we've burnt the grass. We've killed the pest, but we've also killed, the animal or the living organism that we're trying to get rid of.
That's why it's good to have test yards.
Yes, that's usually our own personal residence, right?
Right. What I'm getting at, exactly.
Yes. To drive by my house, you wouldn't think I was in the landscape business. And it's a shame to say that. And all my uncles, they have a painting business, and neither one of them paint their homes. It looks like, Mr. Talbot, you got your hand up in the chat box? I was just double checking there in the chat box if anybody had any questions. But yeah, good information there about, applying too little or too much, and how they can both be very costly for us. So application rates can be stated on the label in how much per area or how much pesticide per mixture or in a percentage. Adjuvants or chemicals mixed in to improve the effectiveness or the safety are often added to the pesticide mixture. Now, that you got to really kind of calculate what's going on, because if you calculate just your chemical and just the water going into the tank, you've got to take into that consideration, because the first thing we got to do is figure out our total mixture and then subtract out the water that's being replaced with the pesticide. And then if we're having to add this extra stuff, we've got to be very, very careful and right with our calculations. But we'll see stuff like 5 gallons per acre, 5 pints active ingredient per acre, 5 tablespoons per gallon, half pound active ingredient per 500 gallons, or 0.5% by volume or by weight. So when we mix, load, and calibrate your spraying using water only. Some pesticides are ready to use, and they are applied until they create runoff like aerosols, baits, foggers, dusters, or collars. And then other ready-to-use need to be loaded into an applicator that requires calibration, including most granular, dust, and some in liquid form. So yes, we've got to calibrate those fertilized spreaders as well. And our fertilized spreaders are the ones that get out of calibration the quickest. And why is that?
Where?
Do what, Mr. Short?
Where?
No,
Where on the equipment?
yeah, the rotary spreaders that we use, they get out of calibration the quickest. Why is that? We're rough on them. I mean, we really are. They're sitting in the back of the truck. They're, you go over speed bumps and stuff like that. They're going to get out of calibration more so than a backpack sprayer or even your hose sprayer that you pull off the truck, just because of the bouncing around. We've got to secure them down with it. That's why I love those little receiver hitch fertilize the spreader holders that kind of go on there. It's a real neat idea. Some concentrates don't need to be applied when with calibrated equipment. They're just diluted, loaded, and sprayed enough to cover it thoroughly or applied to the point of runoff. Most concentrates have to be diluted and applied with calibrated equipment. If we're going to spot spray some weeds and shrub beds, we're probably not going to calibrate that backpack sprayer just to do that. But if we're going to take that backpack sprayer and we're going to use it to spray weeds and turf grass, we're definitely going to calibrate it. The calibration is the process of measuring and adjusting the amount of pesticide your equipment applies or delivers to a specific point. The benefits of calibration include safety, efficiency, and cost savings. Applying more or less than necessary is a waste of money. Now, when it comes to calibration, we definitely need to do it at the beginning of the season. We're getting ready to use this equipment. When are some other times that we would want to calibrate our equipment?
In the middle of the day.
Why is that, Mr. Price?
After lunch, you're slowed down somewhere you've been eating too much.
That's right. That's right. We might be walking. They say the average, applicator walks around 2 to 3 miles an hour. We might be full speed at 8 o'clock in the morning and walking 3 miles an hour. And like I said, we go eat a heavy lunch and it gets hot. We might slow down to 2 miles an hour, and where we've calibrated that equipment that morning, because we should calibrate every single morning before we leave the shop.
Yep.
And then by the end of, getting there after lunch, we are slowing down and we're not putting out enough. Well, no. We're actually putting out too much. I correct myself. When we slow down, we're applying more pesticide than needed. And it's getting closer to 5 o'clock and your employee looks at his route sheet and he sees, oh man, I got two more yards to go to. What do you think he's going to be doing when it's getting around 4:30, 4:45?
He'll be hurrying up then.
He's flying and he's not putting enough pesticide out. So, getting our technicians to understand what it is that we're doing with this calibration, and that they may have to stop and actually calibrate again after lunch. Now, you're not going to want to do that at the customer's house. They may have to come back to the shop and actually do that. And if our technicians run out, I don't want them filling up, with the homeowner's water or whatever. I want them to come back to the shop and get their stuff. Calibration rate is affected by travel speed, particle or droplet size, and pressure or drop mechanism on the application equipment. So first, make a trial run using water only. Measure how much time it takes to physically go over the area, and then measure how much water is sprayed for that amount of time, and then use that measurement of water to determine the amount of pesticide use. So you'll mark out a little area, and then you'll spray it, and then you'll collect that water in a container that you can measure. So with uniform release, measure the output from each nozzle or hopper available for your equipment to be sure you are releasing the correct amount of pesticide. Shouldn't be more or less than 10%. Method 1, operate equipment at a standstill for X amount of time and then measure the output in a container. Method 2 is attach containers to each nozzle or hopper and then run the equipment over the intended area, then measure the output in the containers. Test application, do an accurate measurement of time in the tank, operate the equipment over the intended area at a constant speed, and then measure the amount needed to refill the tank back to the application, to the pre-application level. And with your application rate, this is the amount dispersed divided by your distance covered is your application rate. With small sites, we're using smaller equipment. We're going to scale down using small amounts. Large sites, we're going to use our bigger equipment, probably our boom sprayers. So if you're applying on a large site, like an agricultural crop, use a large site and then a larger amount. And when we calibrate our equipment, we need to calibrate it on terrain that's very similar to our properties that we're getting ready to treat. So if we're going into a neighborhood that's hilly and it has a lot of hills in it, we need to find a place to actually calibrate that equipment that is hilly, because we're not going to walk as fast, you know, across the hill and definitely up the hill as we would if the ground was flat. Here we have our basic, you know, shapes for figuring it. I'm not going to go over that. That's pretty much how we do it. You know, we're doing length by area. If we've got rectangular yards, we have had some, you know, backyards that are circular. So there's the square footage, how to calculate the area of a circle. But I do like this math problem here, calculating the application rate. You determine from a calibration test that your boom sprayer delivered 10 gallons of water over 1/4 of an acre test area. You need to apply a pesticide product to a 10-acre field. We know that 43,560 square feet is in an acre. The pesticide label recommends that 4 ounces of liquid product be added to give a desired finish spray mixture of 1 gallon. There are 128 fluid ounces in a gallon. So how much spray volume and how much product is needed? So step one, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how much spray mixture is needed for the 10-acre application site. Always use information from the calibration test. In this example, 10 gallons of water was used over a 1/4 acre calibration area. So 10 gallons over the 1/4 acre, we're doing our cross multiplications to find out how many gallons per acre, and that gives us 400 gallons of spray mixture needed. Step two, we're going to use the pesticide product that make up the 400 gallons of spray mix. We use the label rate of 4 ounces of product per gallon spray. 400 gallons of spray mixture times 4 ounces, we need 1,600 ounces of product. How many gallons of product are needed? Remember, 128 ounces is a gallon. So 1,600 divided by 128 ounces, we have 12.5 gallons of product. So to treat 10 acres, you need a total final spray mix of 400 gallons. That includes the 12.5 gallons of concentrated product. So how many gallons of water do we need to put in our tank?
$387.5.
Yep, 387.5. We got to minus out the product from the 400 gallons of total spray mixture. A lot of people don't do that. They're like, oh, I need 400 total mix. All right, I'm going to put 400 gallons of water, and then they're going to add the 12.5 gallons of concentrated product. If that happens, what are we doing? Are we applying too much or too little?
Too little.
Yep. It's diluted. So let's always check for misapplication after we've calibrated. Keep an eye on the amount that you're actually applying for the load you calculated. If something is off, stop and check your calculation and your equipment. You can always catch and correct any errors before it's too late. So let's take a sample problem here. How much would an application of Barricade 65 WDG, that means water dispersible granulars, cost for an 8,000 square foot home loan if the labeled rate is 1 pound active ingredient per acre and the Barricade 65 WDG is $39.95 per pound? Then we're going to say, how much would an application of granular combination product cost for the same loan at the same rate? So when using these dry formulations, the number on the label refers to the percentage active ingredient by weight. Example, Barricade 65 WDG is 65% by weight prodiamine active ingredient. Therefore, 100 pounds of Barricade 65 WDG contains 65 pounds of the prodiamine. 1 pound of Barricade is 0.65 pounds of the active ingredient. When using liquid formulations, the number on the label refers to the pounds active ingredient per gallon of product. So example, Barricade 4FL has 4 pounds prodiamine active ingredient per 1 gallon of product. Therefore, if you have 2.5 gallons jug of Barricade 4FL, you have 10 pounds of prodiamine. The 4 pounds per gallon times 2.5 gallons is our 10 pounds active ingredients. So how do we incorporate this information into sprayer spreader cost calculations? We're going to do it through dimensional analysis. We start with what we have to get with what you want. And so we were just talking about what we find in Grandpa's shed, moonshine. Let's think about this in terms of beer. How much would 5 truckloads of beer cost us if we delivered it to a convenience store and there's 1,000 20-ounce drinks on the truck that cost a nickel an ounce? How much will that cost us? We're going to set up a problem very similar to how we would set up a pesticide problem. So we're starting with what we have. We have the truckloads and we want to get to the cost. So we're beginning with the unit that you have and proceed to the unit by canceling out everything else. Now, this is a little bit easier than the math that I have to help my 8th grader with. I can't stand the math that they're having to do at home. I have to teach myself before I can show her how to do it. And thank goodness for Google and YouTube. But with our 5 truckloads, there's 1,000 beers per truckload. There's 20 ounces in a beer, and then each ounce costs a nickel. And so if we do, we'll get us a pen right here. We can cross out the truckloads. We cross out the beers. We cross out the ounce. And remember, we started with truckloads and we're wanting to get to the dollar sign, our cost. And so if we multiply everything out, it's going to be $5,000. So 5 times 1,000 times 20 ounces times 0.05, it gives us the $5,000. So we're going to take that same Barricade problem and we're going to set it up in dimensional analysis. So how much would an application of the Barricade 65 WDG cost for an 8,000 square foot home loan if the labeled rate is 1 pound active ingredient and Barricade 65 WDG is $39.95 per pound? Start with what you have to get with what you want. We have an 8,000 square foot home loan. How much is our product going to cost us? Remember, start with what we got. We got an 8,000 square foot loan. We have 1 acre is equivalent to 43,560 square feet. There's 1 pound active ingredient per acre. There's 1 pound of Barricade is 0.65 pounds active ingredient. We got that from the label. And that 1 pound of it is a $39.95. So we're going to cross out our square feet. We're going to cross out our acres, our pounds active ingredient, crossing out our 1 pound Barricade. And then we're multiplying 8,000 times 1 times 1 times 1 times $39.95, which is our 319,600. And then we're going to multiply 43,560 times 1 times 0.65 times 1. That gives us 28,314. Divide this number into there. And we have $11.28 of product cost to do that 8,000 square foot lawn. Taking that information, what do you think we can do? How many of you know exactly how many square feet you're going to treat this spring with your first round?
You got any ideas?
Oh,
What do you eat?
And I got this information. I got this from Dr. Reynolds. I took a class with him at NC State. 8,000 square foot lawn. That's your typical lawn size in Raleigh. And let's say you go in and you measure, the first 4 or 5 yards that you pick up in a neighborhood, and they're all within a few square feet of each other. Because pretty much, each neighborhood, it's 4 or 5 builders in there. They're building the same house. They may reverse it or flip it and change the roof color, but it's the same house on the exact same size lot. So pretty much any neighborhood you go into, you're going to be very close. So if you're in a neighborhood and you've got 20 of these houses, your square footage there. But the idea is to know exactly how much square footage you're treating in the season. And when you can figure out your cost, like I would even want to take this down to 1,000 square feet. I'd want to know how much it costs me per product per 1,000 square feet. And then when I figure it up and I go to someone's house that's a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, if I know what my product cost is per application and I know what my labor rates are, I'm getting a really good estimate and making some really good money if you know exactly what everything costs you. So the good thing about that, what usually happens in December with some of our vendors, what do they usually have?
leftover.
Well, they'll have some leftovers, but they'll have some discount stuff. Like if you pre-order your fertilizer for the next season, like in December,
Oh yeah.
you can get a pretty, chunk of change. And if your accountant says, hey, you've made too much money this year, you got to spend some money, you can go and buy it at a discounted rate and you're going to make more, on your lawn care apps. So got to know how much square footage you're going to use and how much product you're going to buy before you can actually do that. So any questions, comments, or concerns?